There's a person at every dinner table who reaches for the check before anyone else even looks up. They send gifts nobody asked for, show up with something every time, pick up rounds they can't afford. And we've grown used to calling this generosity. Well, let's put it this way. Strip back the layers and something darker appears. Not generosity. Fear. The specific fear that without the gesture, without the thing, without the transaction, they have no value at all. This is the psychology of people who were taught somewhere early and somewhere permanent that love isn't a given. Love has a price tag. They aren't just buying products. They're trying to buy their way out of loneliness, one credit card swipe at a time. And what nobody ever told them, what no one sat down to explain, is that the debt they carry isn't financial. It started as emotional. The credit card bill is just where that history eventually landed. Here's what nobody tells you about people who live in cycles of financial debt. The spending isn't the problem. The spending is the solution. And you'll agree with me here. It's the only one they found that worked fast enough. The brain isn't being irrational. It's running the fastest emotional repair protocol it knows. Psychologists who study what's called compensatory consumption, the use of purchasing to repair damaged self-worth or soothe emotional pain, have documented a clear pattern. When people feel a threat to their sense of self, their brain almost immediately generates an impulse to acquire. Not food, not shelter. Something with a logo, something visible, something that, for a moment, makes the internal architecture feel solid. Researcher Naomi Mandel at Arizona State University found that people who experienced identity threats were significantly more likely to seek out status signaling products as a form of psychological repair. The brain isn't broken. It's doing exactly what it was trained to do. Find the fastest route from pain to relief. The person in that store isn't thinking about interest rates. Their nervous system is running a much older calculation. For many of them, it starts in childhood. Not always with poverty, though that's part of it for some, but with emotional scarcity. The house where love was conditional, where approval arrived with a price tag or evaporated without warning, where the adults in the room communicated value through things rather than presence. A child raised in that environment learns the lesson with remarkable efficiency. Objects are more reliable than people. Objects don't leave. Objects don't withdraw. Objects can be held, displayed, pointed to as proof that something real exists here. By the time they're adults, the behavior is so automatic it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like breathing. They don't think, I'll purchase this item to regulate the anxiety I feel about my self-worth. They think, I deserve this. And honestly, let's be real. That phrase isn't self-love. It's a desperate attempt to prove they have the right to ask anything of this world at all. A moment of self-permission in a life that often doesn't have many of them. It looks like confidence. It functions like a wound. But here's where it gets genuinely painful. The relief has a half-life measured in hours. Researchers studying what's called the hedonic treadmill, the brain's relentless tendency to return to a baseline emotional state, regardless of external circumstances, have found that the positive emotional effect of a purchase decays faster than almost any other form of emotional regulation. The new thing stops being new within days, sometimes hours. And the emotional gap it was meant to fill hasn't closed. It's the same size it was before. So the cycle begins again. And this time, the entry cost is slightly higher, because the last purchase didn't quite do it. What makes this particularly hard to observe from the outside is that these people often appear generous, not just with themselves, with everyone. They pick up the tab. They send the gift nobody expected. They show up with something for people who didn't ask. And we read this as warmth, as abundance, as character. But underneath that gesture is something closer to a plea. Please notice me. I'm willing to pay for it. Psychologists sometimes call this prosocial spending anxiety, the compulsive need to demonstrate care through financial means because direct emotional expression feels too exposed, too unreliable, too easily rejected. Not because they don't know how to love, because they were taught that love needs a receipt. And the irony is almost unbearable. The person who is trying to buy connection accumulates debt that eventually forces isolation. The credit score drops. The calls start. The shame compounds. And shame, this is critical, is one of the most powerful triggers of the very spending behavior that created the debt. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that feelings of shame, as distinct from guilt, are strongly associated with approach-oriented responses, including purchasing. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am something bad. It's like this. Imagine a vast black hole at the center of the self, and they keep trying to fill it with designer boxes, hoping that this time, finally, a bottom will appear. It never does. Because the hole isn't made of want. It was made of something that happened long before the first credit card application. The debt isn't a consequence of the psychology. The debt is the psychology, made visible. When they're 22, it looks like freedom. The apartment with the furniture they can't quite afford. The wardrobe that says, arrived, before they've arrived anywhere. At 35, the same behavior has a different texture. The purchases are larger, the justifications more elaborate, and somewhere underneath the checkout confirmation screen is a tiredness they can't quite name. They've been running this program for 15 years, and it has never once delivered what it promised. At 45, for those who haven't found another way, the debt has become its own kind of companion, a constant, a structure, almost a relationship, one that, unlike the human ones they've struggled to hold, never disappears. They grieve the version of themselves who didn't need any of this. The child who wanted something simpler than a credit line, wanted someone to stay in the room, to ask how they were doing, to not make affection feel like a transaction. That child is still in there, somewhere below the payment plans and the collection notices, still running the original equation. If I have enough, maybe I'll finally be enough. But here's something the research surfaces that almost never makes it into the public conversation about debt. These people have an extraordinary capacity for connection, not despite the compensatory pattern, because of the need underneath it. The hunger that drove the spending was always, at its core, a hunger for belonging, for being witnessed, for mattering to someone in a way that didn't require a purchase. That hunger, redirected, becomes one of the most powerful relational drives a human being can carry. Their survival became resourcefulness. Their longing became generosity. Their wound became, against all probability, one of the most human things about them. If somewhere in this account there is a person that feels familiar, they are not broken. They are responding to a pain that was never properly addressed with the tools they were given. That's not a character flaw. That's a very human story. Subscribe to this channel. This is the kind of psychology that doesn't make headlines, and it's the kind that matters most.